Hello and welcome to the Hustle to Achieve podcast. On today's episode, we have DeDeep with us, and we are going to talk about NFTs and the Web3 space. Thank you for being here on the podcast, DeDeep, and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate you, inviting me. This is my first podcast, so yeah, man, thanks. I'm pretty happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast, man. So please tell us a bit about yourself and how you got started into NFTs.
So yeah, I am 26. I'm basically from India, and I have been, full time into Web3 since over a year and a half. Predominantly a year back, I was, into just trading crypto, and just spending time learning about different aspects of Web3 and crypto and trading specifically. But then 6 months back, I came across NFTs, and I think that really sort of changed my I would say my fate in a way. I mean, it does sound cliche, but yeah. So 6 months back, I sort of got into NFTs, and now I specifically deal in NFTs. I don't really trade crypto anymore, but yeah.
So before we talk about NFTs, how did you get into crypto? Like, what was that particular instance wherein you got involved in crypto?
So yeah, last year during the second wave of COVID, I remember in April Bitcoin had made this new high of more than 60,000, right? And that is when I was sort of really I came across Bitcoin and crypto, and it really sort of piqued my curiosity. I started doing some research on it, and then within a few weeks I made my first investment, and right after I made a huge investment, there was the biggest flash crash of the year in May. So yeah, man, I was introduced to crypto in a terrible fashion, to be quite honest. Yeah, I lost some money. So yeah, that is how I got into crypto.
So did that change your perception that, when someone who invests in something for the very first time and they experience a loss, their first intuition is that, they want to get out of the market and they don't want to basically stay in the market or invest in for the long term. So how did you manage to get through that phase? And what did you basically believe at that point of time that, you want to get involved? How did you manage to stay involved in the space?
Okay, so I think before I made this before I invested a huge chunk of capital, in May, I had made a small investment, right? But my strategies were wrong. It really minimized my profits, but I did see the upside potential. I invested in Ethereum somewhere around 2300, and I sold around 3500, so that was almost like a 50% gain, right? But the thing is, at that point of time, the capital was very low, and that's why I sort of decided that I might as well increase my capital and see how things go. But like I said, there was this huge crash, but the thing is, I saw the potential. I sort of realized that this is something that is not just your usual asset trading. This is a completely different ball game, and if you know how to be at the right place at the right time, then there is a good chance that you can make a lot of money out of it. I mean, I had heard stories of people who made a lot of money through crypto. So that was obviously one of the factors which played a huge role in making me sort of going more deeper into this field. And yeah, so the next few months I did spend a lot of time just learning, and I made a lot of mistakes, man. I made a lot of mistakes, especially in the first 6 months. I got into leverage trading, and when it is it's like giving a child a lot of chocolates. They don't know that it's not good for them, right?
Yeah.
and they just go all out, and that's what I did, and I lost a lot of money. But then
Hmm.
I knew that I can recover that money, because it was just like my mistakes, right? And when you learn from your mistakes, you can always like end up making changes. So
Yeah.
yeah, that is how my first 6 months were.
So did you tell anyone around you, your friends or family members, about the losses that you were making at that point of time? And if
No,
so,
so
what was the? Hmm.
so I the big chunk of capital that I invested, my
Hmm.
father gave it to me because
Okay.
of COVID. So I was into business and stuff. I had my
Hmm.
own business, but because of COVID, it was affected a lot.
Hmm.
So my father also had heard stories about people becoming rich through crypto, but he was
Okay.
still against investing in it, because it's gambling at the end of the day, right? It's like a more nuanced form of gambling, and he was
Hmm.
absolutely against it. But he still sort of saw me insisting, and he was like, you know what, might as well give it a shot. So
Hmm.
I did not tell anyone, dude. I did
Okay.
not tell anyone. I never told them. and I am unsure whether it's a good thing or not that my parents and my family really trust me a lot. So
Hmm.
yeah, they never really asked what happened with the money.
Hmm.
I did tell them that, you know what, it's a huge crash and everything. So but I
Yeah.
haven't sold anything. That's what I said. But I
Hmm.
actually sold a lot of it for a loss. So
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, man. So that's what happened.
And then, like, moving on to the, like, after the losses that you made, how did you basically come across NFTs, and what was that, like, moment wherein you thought, okay, I've tried crypto, now it's time for me to try NFTs? Also, did you know about the risks involved, since you already, like, you did leverage trading as you mentioned earlier? So were you aware of the risks that were involved with NFTs?
Okay, so so this is a huge time frame that we are talking about, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
My thinking and my experience evolved over time. Like my first 6 months
Hmm.
were full of me making mistakes, like I said, and losing a lot
Hmm.
of money. But at
Hmm.
the same time, I was also learning. Like
Yeah.
I went so deep into it that every day I would spend
Hmm.
time, just learning how to trade, watch videos.
Hmm.
I became a part of certain groups which had experienced traders. So
Hmm.
every day, there would be like there would be conversations and everything. So it was me sort of going through this rites of passage as a trader, where you learn every single bit of nuance related
Hmm.
to trading, right? Because that, I mean, it is like a journey, right? That
Hmm.
you need to learn a lot of things, especially in trading.
Hmm. Hmm.
You not only have to understand the technical aspects of it, but also the emotional aspects of it, right?
Hmm.
So the first 6 months were spent just making myself better at the game, right?
Hmm.
And then eventually I sort of started my own community,
Hmm.
where so this learning and everything made me really confident, right, that I can do
Hmm.
this. So then
Yeah.
I sort of started focusing on teaching other people on how to
Hmm.
avoid making the same mistakes I made. My goal was to sort of bring more people in crypto and make them realize the
Hmm.
potential, while
Hmm.
also guiding them in the beginning, right? So
Hmm.
I would come out with educational content, market insights, and basically sort of handhold them through their beginning of the journey. So
Hmm.
my next 6 months were about teaching others, right?
Okay.
And
Hmm.
then I came across NFTs.
Hmm.
So like my sort of coming across NFTs was a huge sort of a lucky event, right?
Hmm.
It was a luck by fate, luck
Hmm.
by chance sort of event, where I had no plans to get into it, but I somehow just got into it.
Hmm.
I used to hate the idea of NFTs earlier when I was just trading cryptos, because I mean the idea of making money selling JPEGs. It
Hmm.
sounds absurd, right? It sounds
Hmm.
absolutely pathetic if you ask
Hmm.
someone.
Yeah.
But then when I really came across NFTs, and my first NFT play was a huge win for me.
Hmm.
It was absolutely lucky. So
Hmm.
that's when I realized that, dude, this is something that is absolutely brilliant. I mean, you can
Hmm.
make money just selling pictures.
Hmm.
Now it's about really sort of thinking about the potential of this entire thing, right? Because
Hmm.
one after the another, like the more
Hmm.
time I spent on NFTs, the more I
Hmm.
realized that it's not just about trading pictures, but
Hmm.
there are so many other things that
Yeah.
revolve around NFTs. So my
Hmm.
last 6 months have been all about exploring the world of NFTs,
Hmm.
and yeah, here I am, man.
So when you talk about your first experience, it was luck by chance. After having your first big win, that was in Solana community, right? That was on Solana NFTs. So
Yeah.
but prior to that, like I mean, for I believe for the most part, Ethereum NFTs were on the rise since last year. So did you ever think after having made some profits on your first NFT, did you ever think that okay, I need to look into ETH NFTs also, or did you like just go all in on Solana NFTs itself?
So, I mean, I had heard of ETH NFTs, right? Like, I knew
Hmm.
about NFTs in general.
Hmm.
So, I was always aware of the fact that there were issues regarding gas fees,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So, I
Hmm.
never really got into that.
Hmm.
And when I made that huge win in Solana in the beginning,
Hmm.
I realized that this is something that I can focus on, because Solana is more accessible because of the price
Hmm.
and like transaction fees and everything, right? So
Yeah.
for me the priority became Solana.
Hmm.
I had no interest in going to ETH, because at that point of time ETH was definitely higher, like
Hmm.
far more higher. I mean, it already is right now as well.
Yeah.
But even at that point of time, the price of ETH was higher,
Hmm.
and so my focus was always on Solana. I mean, my
Hmm.
size of trading was small, so it made
Hmm.
more sense for me to trade Solana.
Hmm. So after your first win, did you basically think of like what did you think of NFTs as? Did you like consider them as like okay, this is gambling and I can make quick money off of it, or did you go deeper into the ecosystem to find out what actually can happen with these NFTs and how can you basically get involved?
So, like crypto, like what happened with crypto, and it was the same with NFTs. Like,
Hmm.
first you get these lucky wins, right?
Hmm.
Beginner's luck, as they call it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what happened, and then my sort of then I got really aggressive and impatient, because I saw that you can make a quick buck out of it, and I started
Hmm.
making investments in projects that were, I mean, fundamentally weak, and they had,
Hmm.
very little probability of succeeding. However, at
Hmm.
that point of time, I had
Hmm.
no understanding of what makes a solid NFT project, right?
Hmm.
I had the
Hmm.
luck of investing in, good solid projects initially. So
Hmm.
then it was just like a meme, right? You press the
Hmm.
green button and the price goes up. So
Yeah.
that delusion started creeping in. So
Yeah.
then next 2 months, 3 months, I sort
Hmm.
of like I did make losses then.
Hmm.
And then suddenly I realized that the entire NFT community is more involved on Twitter. So
Hmm.
then I sort of started moving towards Twitter, right?
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
initially I was just like all the alpha, quote unquote
Yeah.
alpha, that I was getting was through the Discord servers and projects that I was a
Hmm.
part of. But
Hmm.
I had no idea that Twitter was a completely different
Yeah.
field altogether, where
Hmm.
the size of the alpha and the consistency and the quality of knowledge and alpha that was there on that
Hmm.
platform was
Hmm.
so much better than Discord,
Hmm.
because Discord is more uh, it's like a more uh, gate kept community, right?
Hmm.
But Twitter is like, everyone is there. So
Hmm.
that's when things really got better for me, when I sort of got introduced to the NFT community on
Hmm.
Twitter.
Hmm. I do want to talk about, like, your social media presence, especially on Twitter. But before that, you mentioned earlier that you did not know much about the fundamentals of a project. So what kind of fundamentals are we talking about? Because it is very difficult to, like, understand fundamentals when you're investing in NFTs. So what do you think are the fundamentals that we should look at, or you looked at after that point?
So, I mean, it's a mix of a lot of things, right? The
Hmm.
basic would be, what kind of background does the team have?
Hmm.
What is the project aiming to do? Do you think
Hmm.
that the idea that they are, the idea that they have
Hmm.
is something that is sustainable, right? Like, if there is an issue or a problem that they are trying to solve, is it
Hmm.
sustainable? Do you think that the project can have revenue for a long time and they can survive?
Hmm.
Because if you remember, the beginning of this year was all about, the war and geopolitical issues
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
around the world, right?
Hmm.
So obviously that was when the bear market sort of really started creeping in aggressively,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
the focus was to look for projects that had a good idea,
Hmm.
right? And then you look at the team, like I said, what kind of background does the team have? Are they
Hmm.
doxed? Are they undoxed? Do they
Hmm.
have any success rate in Web2 or Web3
Hmm.
even, right? And
Hmm.
you basically sort of read up on them, right? I mean, if you look at their website, if you look at any project's website or any company's website, you
Hmm.
can really determine whether they are professional, whether they are taking care of the little things like
Hmm.
grammar, or the aesthetics.
Hmm.
And then you sort of look at the untangible things, which are more subjective, like art, right? Is
Hmm.
the art attractive?
Hmm.
Do you believe that the art will appeal to the wider audience?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then comes the community aspect, what kind of presence they have on Twitter,
Hmm.
what kind of activity and engagement is present on Twitter, as well as within their own Discord, right? You can
Hmm.
sort
Hmm.
of see whether the community is actually
Hmm.
participating at all times. What amount of, like, what percentage of the community is excited? Like, these
Hmm.
are some things that you can sort of gauge at and figure out
Hmm.
the probability of a project succeeding. I mean, at that point of time, it
Hmm.
was much different, and now things have, evolved.
Hmm.
So yeah, but these are some of the factors that you can sort of look at and just, like,
Hmm.
predict whether or not the project can do well or not.
Hmm. So what would you, like, how would you rank the different types of fundamentals that you just talked about? Would you, like, rank the community first? Would you rank the founders first? Would you rank the art first? How would that, like, ranking be made?
So for me, I mean, if you ask me this question 6 months ago, the answer would have been much better, much different than what I would tell right now. Like,
Hmm.
after speaking to so many project founders
Hmm.
across, these past few months,
Hmm.
for me the most important thing, in a project are the founders.
Hmm.
You can talk to someone and know whether they are solid,
Hmm.
right? You just know, you look at someone, you talk to them, and you can basically predict whether this person is capable enough of succeeding,
Hmm.
whether they have the sway to convince people.
Hmm.
There is this certain charm that you need to have in order
Hmm.
to build a following, a
Hmm.
loyal community. So my
Hmm.
number one priority right now is definitely project founders.
Hmm.
And it would be a tie between art and community, because for me art is something, obviously, as someone, like, I have a media background, right? So for
Hmm.
me, my preference of art would be so much different than someone who probably has less interest in art. So
Hmm.
I prefer certain kind of art, right? But
Hmm.
regardless of whether the art is appealing to me or not, I like to
Hmm.
see the social sentiment, whether
Hmm.
it's appealing to the broader community. So
Hmm.
I would like to keep community about art in this sense, because the chances of you succeeding increase so much when you have a loyal community, a
Hmm.
community that's ready to fight for you when things go down. So for
Hmm.
me, founders, community, and then art, these are
Hmm.
the rankings that I would keep. I mean, of course, you have to also look at utility and everything, but then
Hmm.
that's a completely different
Hmm.
field altogether.
Hmm. So you've talked to, like, a number of founders on your Twitter Spaces and otherwise as well. So how do you basically differentiate between the different types of founders or projects that they're building, and how do you basically figure out, okay, this is a legit founder that I'm willing to bet on, and what are some of the qualities? I know you mentioned some of the qualities, but if you could just, like, give more details regarding how do you differentiate between someone who's legitimate, someone who's genuinely building during this time, and someone who's just, like, not really caring about the community and just in here for a cash grab.
So I think the number one quality is charm. Like I
Hmm.
said, the person has to be a really good speaker. They need to be
Hmm.
able to communicate their ideas in a simple manner, right?
Hmm.
Because sometimes the team may be working on complex issues, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
to really able to communicate that
Hmm.
complex idea to a layman, that
Hmm.
is a huge task. And if a
Hmm.
project founder is able to do that, in an easy fashion, for me,
Hmm.
that's something that's a solid sort of factor, right? So
Hmm.
that's one.
Hmm.
The other would be someone that's interesting,
Hmm.
right? I mean, if you are talking to me, and if you can't really keep me entertained
Hmm.
about what you are building, then I
Hmm.
probably won't have any interest in listening to you. And I have seen that all the project founders that I really admire, they know how to capture attention. Not only capture attention, but also to retain it for a longer period of time. Like, you would want to listen to those people even if they go on a rant for half an hour, right? So that is something that is important to me. Someone
Hmm.
who's, I would hate to use the word entertaining, but let's go with that. Someone
Hmm.
who can entertain you for a while, even if
Hmm.
they're talking about something that's absolutely boring. So these
Hmm.
are two things. So clarity, communication, charm. What else are we talking about? Someone who's obviously
Hmm.
well aware about their project, as well
Hmm.
as the Solana community, if we are talking about specifically Solana, as well as
Hmm.
the broader NFT market,
Hmm.
and everything that is a tie to our industry,
Hmm.
right? You
Hmm.
need to have at least some form of legal awareness about everything that you are doing about your project. So if a
Hmm.
founder is really, if he has
Hmm.
taken care of everything that needs to be taken care of, all the potential issues that can come up in the future, like,
Hmm.
you just know that they know what they are doing. So
Hmm.
that would be one of them. I mean, these are some things that you just know when you talk to someone, that you would
Hmm.
want to invest in them.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean,
So,
and the last
hmm.
thing would be,
Yeah.
I know I did talk about charm, but NFTs are like modern day cults,
Hmm.
right? And if I'm unsure if you have noticed this, but there are these few founders, you can literally see they have formed this cult,
Hmm.
that their community would be ready to go on a war for them. And that
Yeah.
is something that is really important. If you
Hmm.
can do that,
Hmm.
that is, I guess, I think that is the nail in the coffin.
Hmm.
If you can do that, if you have all these qualities that I mentioned before,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
on top of that you have this really weird attractive sense about yourself that people would go on a war for you, they would defend
Yeah.
you at any given point of time. That's just amazing. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, right, as you mentioned, I think that comes with, like, all the qualities that you mentioned, and also the level of intellect, right? I mean, you can be confident, but if you don't know what you're talking about, then, I mean, there's only so much that you can do. It has also, like, a sense of what you're doing, what your purpose is, what you want, what your vision is, combining that with the vision, or, like, the demands of the community that may arise. I think all of those components, when you mix them up, and when you basically voice your opinions every single time that you go on, like, social media, I think that that's a huge, like, plus, which allows or enables people for like, to fight for you, or, like, to follow you wherever you go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you will make a good point on Twitter, there's a good chance that people who resonate with it, they will
Hmm.
develop this affinity towards you,
Hmm.
regardless of whether they are a part of your community, of your project or not.
Hmm. So I wanted to talk about utilities, because, I mean, I mean, Web3 is a very new space for all of us, most of us. What do you think of utility when it comes to projects, and how do you basically define what a good utility would be for an NFT project?
So let me try and simplify this. Utility is basically, like a problem that the project is trying to solve,
Hmm.
right? A project could be solving a utility that's more Web2. They could
Hmm.
also be, providing a utility that's more, ecosystem centric, right?
Hmm.
So it could be like something like providing tools to the community,
Hmm.
providing tools for, like other projects, right? So it's like a broad umbrella, right? For
Hmm.
me, a good utility would be how sustainable it is, in the sense
Okay.
that, do I really believe that the problem that they are trying to solve will remain a problem for a long time, right? I mean, there are projects which are trying to solve multiple things, but there's this huge umbrella of problem that they are trying to solve, right? So do I really believe that their problem will be relevant, their goals and vision would be relevant 6 months down the line, one year down the line? So
Hmm.
that's something which I look at. I mean, so this ecosystem is starting to become more like investing in a startup, right? Founders come to you, and like creating an NFT project and getting money out of mint funds and secondary is essentially like raising money for a startup,
Hmm.
right? And instead of venture capitalists, they are going to these individual investors, building a community out of it and raising funds through them,
Hmm.
right? And we as an ecosystem are also evolving in a way where we think of ourselves as quote unquote investors, right?
Hmm.
6 months before or one year before, the the utility aspect of a project was not so important, if you ask
Hmm.
me, right?
Hmm.
If you just took care of art and community, your chances of being successful were high. But
Hmm.
now utility has become such an important aspect. uh,
Hmm.
People would want to, I mean, I'm not saying that projects with no utility don't succeed,
Hmm.
but now there is this long term vision being introduced in our ecosystem, where people are thinking, what, if I want to invest in this project for a long term,
Hmm.
do they provide enough utility, do they solve enough problems
Hmm.
for me to stay invested in the project? I mean, it's like a new form of hedging,
Hmm.
investing in NFTs, because it's a completely different thing, right? I mean,
Hmm.
depending on when you invest, your chances of making money are there regardless of what's happening in the macro environment, regarding what's happening in the overall crypto market, right?
Hmm.
I mean, there are huge factors, but what I'm saying is it's become some sort of a hedging tool, So utility has become very important to people. So it's almost as if you are investing in a startup. So what kind of problem is the startup trying to solve? Is it solid enough? Do you think they will last? Okay, then invest in it and stay invested for a while.
So, as you just mentioned that, the NFT space is basically transforming into a startup world of its own. And these projects are basically, let's say, crowdfunding from retailers or people who are minting these NFTs. And now there are the let's say the blue chip projects or even some projects that are new in the ecosystem that they are raising VC funds and they are raising money from investors, and on Twitter and even on Discord people are talking about they've raised so much money as through mints and even royalties, and do they really need to raise funds from VCs or other investors, and they'll just basically dilute the positions or the equity in that sense. So what do you think about that?
I mean, dude, having a VC investment in your project is like having a father in your life. If you have a father in your life, the chances of you becoming successful certainly increase. But if you don't have a father in your life, it doesn't really guarantee that you will fail. Right? So, I mean, it does certainly, give you an advantage if you as a project have raised VC funding. But I mean, it doesn't really matter in a way where people should sort of start saying then that since you have raised funds, you have no right to, crowdfund more funds. Right? That doesn't make sense. I mean, dude, at the end of the day, VCs are just, they are also sort of investing in a way where they know what the risks are. They are like subtle DJs, right? They know the upside, they know the downside, and they are just like us, but with more money, right? So at the end of the day, we are absolutely no one to really say that that it's wrong for you to ask for money from us just because you are VC funded.
Yeah, obviously, some projects are raising VC funds. At the same time, what do you think are the major differences between running a Web2 business and a Web3 company? How do they differ in terms of operations, and what do the Web3 founders as well as VCs they need to understand about the Web3 community or the Web3 world?
I mean, it's different, right? I mean, Web3 sort of gives you this advantage of crowdfunding your capital. So that's a huge advantage. I mean, apart from that, it's a completely different field, right? I mean, like I said, there are some problems within the Web3 ecosystem that you can solve, and if it's relevant enough, people will want to invest in you. While Web2 businesses, if you go out and seek funding, it's very difficult, right? So that's like a huge. I mean, if I have, for example, if you and I want to, start a yoga retreat, right? It will be difficult for us to sort of, crowdfund capital for that. But with Web3, that changes completely, because there will be potential investors who, if they believe that your idea is sustainable and can sort of give them some kind of benefits, they'd want to invest in you. So I think that's one of the core differences between Web2 businesses and Web3 businesses.
So someone, let's say, someone who's a big Web2 founder and someone who's also running, who's into the Web3 world, someone who's a founder and building something. What do you think, what should a Web2 founder keep in mind when they're coming into the Web3 ecosystem, and how can they make themselves, heard and have an influence in the Web3 ecosystem?
This is quite simple. I mean, Web2 and Web3 are completely different. So if you are successful in Web2, it hardly guarantees success in Web3, because the way the community operates over here is completely different. It's much more intimate, it's much more direct,
Hmm.
I mean, you can sort of, like, if you are a Web2 founder, right?
Hmm.
How many times do you talk to people who have invested in your business? Not
Hmm.
enough, right? But in
Yeah.
Web3, it's a completely different ball game where project founders hop on Twitter Spaces
Hmm.
regularly. I mean, especially in Solana, it's
Hmm.
quite different in ETH because the standards there are different. But I will talk about Solana because I have more idea about that, right? So Solana, in Solana, founders really sort of make sure they spend a lot of time, with the community directly. So if
Hmm.
anyone has any doubts, any problems, any issues, they can talk
Hmm.
directly to founders and get answers, right?
Hmm.
But in
Hmm.
Web 2, it doesn't really work that way. And
Hmm.
and in terms of also marketing and everything,
Hmm.
your marketing needs to be more community centric, where
Hmm.
obviously there are key players within the community. I mean, it's a small ecosystem, right? So
Hmm.
there are so many key players or key performers in the ecosystem, right? So if you know how
Hmm.
to leverage them,
Hmm.
through your marketing, it sort of ensures that you get more eyeballs on you, right? So
Hmm.
there's a good
Hmm.
chance that you will have to take a much more different approach to your marketing in Web3, because
Hmm.
chances are that if you stick to Web2 tactics, you most
Hmm.
likely will fail. So
Hmm.
these are some things that I think a Web2 person who is going on Web3, they need to keep these things in mind. Like, you need to be
Hmm.
more intimate with your community.
Hmm. Let's talk about Twitter. So you earlier mentioned that you were earlier basically having your groups on Discord, and you were basically involved in NFTs just by getting just by becoming a part of those groups on Discord. So when you moved to Twitter, how did that change your approach? And when did you realize, okay, it's one thing that I'm learning over here, and I'm following all these people who are the founders and let's say bigger creators in the space, and it's another thing to go out there and start building your own voice in the space. How did you transition to that?
So I mean, I have been active on Twitter for the past 5 years, right?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
just that I came across the NFT community a few months back.
Hmm.
So my content was absolutely different, like 6 months back.
Hmm.
So I was a very small account, right?
Hmm.
So then, when I came across the NFT community, I started seeing Twitter Spaces, right?
Hmm.
I saw influencers of the Solana ecosystem and
Hmm.
the NFT ecosystem in general be
Hmm.
present on Twitter Spaces. I
Hmm.
started seeing more content about NFTs, right? So
Hmm.
being I was spending majority of my time on Twitter anyway, right? But
Hmm.
now I started spending more time within the small NFT ecosystem, and it started sort of giving me insights about things that I had no idea about,
Hmm.
right? About NFTs in general,
Hmm.
about the potential, about the history, so
Hmm.
many things. So I became more in touch with the idea of NFTs itself
Hmm.
when I
Hmm.
started spending more time in this ecosystem.
Hmm. So when you first came across Twitter Spaces, it's one thing to go out there and listen to a space, and it's another thing to gather up the courage to go up and speak. How did you gather that courage? Okay, from listening to speaking, and how did that change your perspective towards what you're doing right now?
Oh, so my initial experiences were quite traumatic, because there are some influencers which are I mean, it's like a show, right? They
Hmm.
put on this performer's mask on a
Hmm.
Twitter space,
Hmm.
and they could be mean, they could be rude, but
Hmm.
it's just for fun's sake, right? It's just all
Hmm.
banter. But as if you're someone new and if you go on a big stage, the chances
Hmm.
are high that you can end up making a fool out of yourself. So initially I did sort of experience that, so
Hmm.
it did leave a bitter taste in my mouth. But
Hmm.
then what happened was, I started joining small spaces, right? People,
Hmm.
like spaces with people, like, like 10 people or less than 10 people,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
that's how I sort of, like started giving a finishing touch to my skills, because I have always been a decent public speaker,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
this was, like I said, it was very different, right?
Hmm.
So what I did was I spent, like at least 2 months just being on small spaces,
Hmm.
and yeah, and eventually I started spending so much time on spaces, like I started hosting my own spaces eventually, and I used
Hmm.
to spend more than 10 12 hours every single day just hosting Twitter spaces.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Hmm.
initially, I spent time on other people's spaces which were small. Then I
Hmm.
got enough confidence to start my own spaces.
Hmm.
That's when I spent majority of my time, just grinding, like talking to so many people every single day. And
Hmm.
then people started noticing me. Project
Hmm.
founders started noticing me, and I
Hmm.
think that was the real first step that I took,
Yeah.
in terms of growing in the ecosystem.
So when you first started your own Twitter Spaces, what was your initial experience like? How many people joined, and like how did you then grow it? Obviously, you spent a lot of time, but did you apply different strategies, or did you try to bring in other people through other through tweeting or any other sources?
No, it was casual all the time, right? I mean, so like I said, I already used to spend time on other people's spaces, so that's how I made friends. That's how project founders sort of started, coming across me, and then I would have my own spaces, which were so casual. But here's the thing about casual spaces, man. Sometimes you just organically grow into conversations which are, like eye opening, which are
Hmm.
sometimes intense, which are
Hmm.
sometimes funny. So when
Hmm.
you're not following a set template, you have
Hmm.
this freedom to move around
Hmm.
in any form, right? So that
Hmm.
was, I think, the biggest advantage I had at that point of time was being able to be myself, right?
Hmm.
I used to just make fun of everyone on Twitter spaces. I used to laugh so much. I used to
Hmm.
make
Hmm.
others also laugh so much,
Hmm.
and that's why project founders would really sort of enjoy being on spaces with me,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
I always keep, like I always try to keep it really light and
Hmm.
fun. And
Hmm.
at that point of time, Twitter spaces was just sort of becoming the norm.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, when you spend like 10 hours on a Twitter space, you come across so many people,
Hmm.
uh, and instances, there are like so many instances which are just like memorable and everything. So that sort of started happening every single day, where
Hmm.
I just started a space and things just started happening on their own organically. Nothing was planned. It
Hmm.
wasn't like a show that had a specific script and certain topics that I wanted to touch upon. It's
Hmm.
just that it's like your friends and you sitting around a campfire and just having conversations. So
Hmm.
that's how it sort of started growing.
Hmm.
And yeah, like we had some great conversations, man.
So how did you start? I mean, you mentioned that you keep your Twitter Spaces light. Was it always the case that you were always humorous, or did you develop it after getting into the space and looking at how others were basically entertaining on Twitter, or posting memes? How did that turn out?
No, I was just being myself, man. Like I said,
Hmm.
I had no idea. uh, i I never went into anything, any space
Hmm.
with the idea of faking things,
Hmm.
right? I have
Hmm.
always been myself, even in real life. Like I'm pretty chill as a person. Like I
Hmm.
always like to joke around, because I mean, there are times when you of course need to be serious and have
Hmm.
conversations that
Yeah.
require sensitive approach. right? But when you are having just casual conversations, it was just about having fun, right? Make sure that everyone has fun, and that would sort of make sure that whenever they want to have fun, they will come to your space. So that was just the idea, being myself, joke around, and it sort of gave me the freedom to be myself, to be quite honest, because I mean, in real life, I really go out less, to be quite honest. I all my friends are in other towns and cities, so I rarely get a chance to joke around my own friends because they are away, right? But what this entire thing did was it gave me a platform where I can meet other people who are like me and have fun with them, where I can joke with them and they can joke with me. So that's how it sort of uh, yeah, that's how the platform grew, man. It was all casual, and then it kept on growing, and like more people sort of started witnessing me.
So from building your Twitter space, like Twitter following, what were like, how did you approach things as Twitter started growing for you, and when did you really think, okay, you can really scale it up and like develop it into a brand?
I think uh, it's been like 3 months, I would say, since 3 or more than 3 months now, since I think the first sort of seed in my mind was planted, that what, if I am smart about this, I can create a brand about myself. I mean, like if you remember, I had mentioned to you earlier that I have experience in business in real life, and that was also more to do with creating a brand out of myself, right? So I have always been sort of focused on developing my brand, but this was the first time where you know the possibility of me creating a brand that was so close to my personality was possible. So when that first thought came, I went absolutely aggressive on Twitter Spaces. I said, right, that I used to spend more than 10 hours a day
Yeah.
just grinding being on Spaces. I think I
Yeah.
started doing that once I realized the potential that this ecosystem has, that my own persona on Twitter has, and I just went all in, man, dude.
Yeah.
First, I used to post, like I said, I used to trade and stuff, so I used to post charts and everything, and that also sort of added to my visibility. But then more and more visibility I started having, I realized that instead of giving out financial advice and posting charts, people would want to just laugh,
Yeah.
right? So I started posting more memes and more funny content that was closer to my personality, and I think that is what really sort of pushed my growth to the next level. So it was like taking one step at a time, but this was probably the biggest step that I took, changing my content on Twitter, and it just it just was a hit.
Are you currently also looking at other platforms wherein you can grow your brand, or are you sticking to Twitter for now?
So if you remember, earlier I told you, right, that I used to create content for my
Yeah.
community. So that was on other platforms, right? But the returns which I saw on other platforms was nowhere close to what I saw on Twitter. So as of this specific moment, I have no incentive to try out other platforms, because I think it's necessary to first make sure that I leverage Twitter as much as possible and grow as much as possible on this
Yeah.
specific platform. And then when I've reached a dead end, then I can possibly look at other platforms. But I do believe there is a lot of upside that I am yet to see on Twitter itself. So it gives me no incentive to look at other things.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely true. Just a final question before we wrap up. For someone who's like planning to build a brand of their own on Twitter and looking to get started in the NFT space, what are like some pieces of advice that you can give?
Be consistent,
Hmm.
try to be memorable in the sense that you should have something to your content or to your personality that just sticks out and people can remember that. So you need to stand out, right? And more often than not you can stand out by being consistent, because
Hmm.
there are so many people who just give up on the grind, man. I think even if you look at the number one influencer on Twitter, he has been having a space every single day without fail at the same time.
Hmm.
That is consistency. So I
Hmm.
think the number one thing you need to focus on is being consistent. Show
Hmm.
up every single day.
Hmm.
Either you will learn from people or people will learn from you, or both the cases, right?
Hmm.
So be consistent, try to stand out. And about building a brand, right? It's about staying true to yourself.
Hmm.
It's about finding this one thing about you that stands out, and then finding ways to amplify it,
Hmm.
right? So for me it was my humor.
Hmm.
My jokes were like they landed on Twitter spaces. So then what I did, I found a way to sort of translate that humor into tweets, right? Then
Hmm.
I sort of started amplifying it by taking the said humor to bigger spaces. So
Hmm.
it's just about finding that one thing that you are good at, and then
Hmm.
finding ways to sort of leverage that.
Hmm.
So you always need to sort of grow in that specific niche. So
Hmm.
if you really believe that you lack that specific niche, that specific aspect of your personality, then I
Hmm.
would just suggest that you start grinding first, get that thing sorted,
Hmm.
and eventually people will give you feedback. You
Hmm.
will just know what you are good at and what people like about you, and
Hmm.
then you can sort of start building from there.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Dedeep. It was great to have you, and like you gave some really good pieces of advice right now, and I'm pretty sure our listeners they learned a lot of things from you about the space and also growing a brand on Twitter. So thank you again so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Like I said, this was my first podcast, so I really appreciate you giving me an invitation. So yeah, man, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.